All right, we are in Colossians 1 and verse 27. Colossians 1 and verse 27. About halfway through the verse, I was just telling Jackie that I got 2.5 pages worth of notes before we finish the chapter. So I don't know if that's a lot of notes or if that's a little notes. So, we'll just see how far we get. And at the end, if we end up getting through all the notes, then we can blow some smoke and fill in some of the lacking time. So, as a lot of you already know, Sarah and I spent a good portion of the day at the hospital. Sarah's still at the hospital. We will know an update tomorrow afternoon, whether or not she's going to get discharged from the hospital or whether or not we're going to have a baby sooner rather than later. They gave her a steroid shot this afternoon, and they will give her another steroid shot tomorrow. And so we're probably looking at sooner rather than later for a baby. So keep us in your prayers. Colossians 1 and verse 27, Paul writes to the Colossians, "To them God willed to make known what are the riches of the glory of this mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory." We're talking about this mystery of the gospel, which we're summarizing as impartial salvation. Impartial meaning it doesn't matter who you are, male or female, bond or free, red or yellow, black and white. Doesn't matter who you are. What matters is what you do. What matters is your obedience to the gospel, right? And that way it is impartial salvation. Right. Now, talking about impartial salvation, because it is impartial salvation, it is also impartial condemnation. What do I mean by that? What is impartial condemnation? If impartial salvation means it doesn't matter who you are, you can be saved, what do you think impartial condemnation means? It doesn't matter who you are, you can be condemned. Right? God is going to condemn anyone who disobeys. Right? It doesn't matter who your father was, who your grandfather was. It doesn't matter if you were a direct descendant of Abraham or of David or of any of those other famous Jews. You can be lost. Right? We have impartial condemnation. That's applied both to the Jews and to the Gentiles. Okay? Notice that Paul says here that this impartial salvation is Christ in you. The riches, the glory, the mystery among the Gentiles is Christ in you. In other words, Christ in you Gentiles, Christ in the Gentiles shows that the Gentiles can be saved. Right? So let me take a step back. He's looking at the Gentiles, and he's saying, you see Christ in you, that shows you that you can be saved. Right? In other words, it's just an example that even the Gentiles can be saved. So, all right. We looked at last week how this impartial salvation was not revealed. The gospel plan of salvation was not revealed in the Old Testament, right? It was hidden from the Old Testament. Just because it was not yet known that how God was going to save man. How did God decide to save man? By whose sacrifice? By Jesus' sacrifice, right? Just because it was not known until Jesus died on the cross that God was going to use that sacrifice on the cross as the means of saving man, just because it was not known that God was going to use impartial salvation in order to save man, anyone can be saved if they obey, it was hinted at in the Old Testament. So we're going to read two passages here. Let's open our Bibles to 1 Samuel 15 and verse 22. 1 Samuel 15 and verse 22. Here Samuel is speaking to Saul, King Saul has not obeyed the voice of the Lord. He has not killed the Amalekites and the king and the animals under the Amalekites. And so Saul, in his defense, says, well, we kept these animals alive so that we can sacrifice them to the Lord. Saul assumed that God was going to overlook the disobedience in favor of the sacrifice. And here's how Samuel responds to that. 1 Samuel 15, verse 22. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. Which is better, sacrifice or obedience? Which is better, instrumental music or obedience? Which is better, making a show out of worship services or obedience? Right? Obedience is better, except for, sometimes we get confused and we think, well, these things feel better, and they might legitimately feel better, right? But it's just because it feels better doesn't mean it actually is better, right? The hippies were wrong when they said if it feels good, looks good, it must be good. They were wrong when they said that. God decides what is better. Here in this example, we see that God has always preferred obedience. It doesn't matter what you give him as long as it's obedience to him. Right? It doesn't matter who you are as long as you obey him. Impartial salvation, always the plan. God doesn't look at God doesn't look at who you are. God doesn't look at really what you do. God looks at what you do in obedience to him. Right? So you could be by that I mean like you could be a firefighter, a police officer, or a doctor, or any of the other non-first responder occupations. You can be anything that you want to be. As long as you're a Christian, you can be saved. Right? Okay. Here's another passage, Micah 6, verses 6 through 8. This is the last one we'll look at, then we'll close out this verse. Talking about impartial salvation. Micah 6, 6 through 8. This is a good summary verse for what God expects from us, period. Right? If you wanted this in Mark 12 and verse 30 are two good summary verses for if somebody asked you, what does God want from me? Name it in one verse. These would be two good verses to go to. Mark 12 and verse 30, this is the greatest command. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, strength, and mind. Right? This one is very similar to that thought. Micah 6, 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of the body of my sin, of my soul? He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. If you wanted to summarize the responsibility of every human person ever to live that has reached the age of accountability, you can summarize it in these three steps: to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Right. Ecclesiastes 12:13 would be another one. Let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole of man. Right. That these are good summary verses for what the purpose of life is. Right. Do justly. What does that mean? It means you don't put your thumb on the scale when you're selling something to someone. That means that you do honest work. You don't, what's the word? Yeah. You're fair. Yep. Do justly, to walk humbly. What does that mean? That means your nose isn't pointed upwards, right? That means you put others above yourself. Isn't that how Paul phrased it in Philippians? Esteem each one better than himself. And walk, and to love mercy and walk humbly with your God. I got them out of order. Love mercy, what does that mean? That means when somebody who doesn't deserve kindness, what do you still show them? You still show them kindness. You still show them grace, mercy, right? Probably the most common example of mercy today is whenever the police officer pulls you over because you were speeding, and then they don't write you a ticket. Did you deserve the ticket? Yes, if you were speeding. But did he have to write you a ticket? No. Mercy. That's what mercy is, right? It's a judicial term. It's whenever you withhold punishment, whenever punishment is deserved, right? There are times when we should be merciful, right? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. That's the beatitude. Your husband preached on that just last week. So, any thoughts on Colossians 1 and verse 27, impartial salvation? I know that was kind of we kind of jumped into the middle of that because we were starting that. I mean, we started last week, but any thoughts or questions on impartial salvation? Or Colossians 1 and 27? Or anything? Okay, Colossians 1 and verse 28. Now we're shifting gears a little bit. Paul writes about Christ, him we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom, that we may present every man perfect in Christ Jesus. Paul here is going to divide preaching into two different categories. What are they? Him we preach, doing what and doing what? Warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom. Okay. This is two good categories for preaching. Obviously, it's a biblical categorization of preaching. Warning and teaching. I want to look at several occurrences of that word warning first so that we can get a clear mental picture. This was interesting to me as I was studying this. I want to get a clear mental picture of what this word warning really means. Before we look at those verses, could someone give a general description of the word warning? What does that mean? Like if you were given a warning by someone, what might that look like? Making them aware of danger. That's a good definition. Yeah. Anyone else? Taking caution. Yeah. Trying to keep them headed towards safety rather than headed towards whatever upcoming disaster is ahead. Yeah, preventing them from disaster. Yeah. As we look through this, we'll get a little bit more of a nuanced picture of warning. So, in the New King James Bible, this word that's translated warning is also sometimes translated admonition. So warning, admonition, they're going to be used interchangeably as we read these verses. All right, first verse is Acts 20 and verse 31. Again, we're looking at this word used in several different contexts to get a clear picture of what this word means. Acts 20 and verse 31 is the first context. Acts 20 is where Paul is meeting with the Ephesian elders for the last time. He's in Miletus, which is on the coast. He's headed back towards Jerusalem, where he's going to be arrested. So he's saying, you shall see my face no more. And he's reminding them what he did while he was with them for 3 years. Acts 20, verse 31. Paul says to these Ephesian elders, "Therefore watch and remember that for 3 years I did not cease to warn everyone night and day with tears." What's the emotion? What's the physical thing that Paul does whenever he's warning people in this verse? What's he doing while he's warning people? He's crying with tears. Right? This is not a "you're going to hell" kind of a warning, right? This is you need to fix your life. Right? This is a very very concerned word. All right, let's go to the next one. Ephesians 6 and verse 4 to the same audience. A little time later, Paul's in prison while he's writing this one. Ephesians 6 and verse 4. Verse that we might be hearing a little bit more as our kids get older, especially the verses preceding it. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Ephesians 6 and verse 4, Paul says, "And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and the admonition of the Lord." Same thing. Don't you do that! It's not this kind of admonition. It might be stern, but it's not harsh. It's not unloving. It's not hateful. It's nurture and admonition. It's nurture and warning. It's deep concern. All right. To our good friend Colossians. Colossians 3 and verse 16. Colossians 3 and verse 16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Probably no one's going to really be screaming and being hateful while you're singing, right? That's not typically the case unless, like, you listen to heavy metal, right? Which I can't imagine us doing heavy metal in a worship service, you know. I think I might leave if we started doing that. It's warm. This is a warm kind of warning. All right. Next one, 1 Thessalonians. We'll get one from 1 Thessalonians, one from 2 Thessalonians. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 14. Paul writes, "Now we exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all." Notice what he pairs this word with. Warn those who are unruly, comfort those who are faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all. Warn, comfort, uphold, and patient are all used in the same, in a similar way in this verse, right? This is a very interesting clumping. By the way, he's talking about erring members here, right? When we have brethren who are not living right, and we go to warn them of their wicked way, we're not, how do I want to phrase this? We're not guilt-tripping them. We're not spitting on them. We're trying to point them in the right direction. Deep concern again. Okay. 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 15. 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 15. Again, same audience. An erring Christian. "Yet do not count him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother." Okay? Those of you who have physical brothers, right? Brothers in the flesh. Those two back on the back row, right? I don't know how you guys do it, right? But probably not the way to go talk to your blood brother is to go and just cut him down constantly, right? I certainly don't talk to my blood brother like that, right? And we've had disagreements. We fought whenever we were kids, right? But now that we're adults, we don't pull out the fist to get our way. Right? Admonish him as a brother, full of love. Okay. Next one is Titus 3 and verse 10. There's two left, right? Titus and one in Romans. Titus 3 and verse 10 gives us a really clear picture here. Titus 3 and verse 10. This one I think is very interesting. "Reject a divisive man after the first and second admonition." Why? What's a divisive man, first of all? Yep. Right. This is to use a modern vernacular, right? This is no offense, but this is a Karen. What's a Karen? Yeah, you like that? Yeah. Someone who complains, someone who you can't give them things to appease them. They are set in their ways. They're going to find things that are wrong. They're going to be divisive no matter what. What does Paul tell Titus to do with a divisive man? After one or two admonitions, reject him. Okay? If this word warning, if this word admonition was one that was cold and hateful and mean, why wouldn't you continue warning a divisive man? But that's not what this word is. This word is one that's reserved for your brother. This one is reserved for an erring child of God. This is a word that's used for your children. This is a word that's used for using in song. This is a word that's used by Paul, and he used tears as he did this. Right? We're getting a really good mental picture here of this word warning, isn't it? This is a warm, deep concern, loving kind of warning. Not a barking, shouting in your face like a drill sergeant kind of warning. This is stern. It's not to say that you're going to sugarcoat it, but it's not hateful. Okay, last verse. Romans 15:14. Romans 15 and verse 14. Paul writes to the Romans, "Now I myself am confident concerning you, my brethren, and you also are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, able also to admonish one another." He pairs the word goodness and admonishing with each other here. It is good to admonish one another. This is a word that's used for each other, one another, for common Christians, right? We should admonish one another. When we see one of us erring, when we see one of us not doing what's right, you think about your children, right? If you see your children headed to put their fingers in the electric outlet, do you let them do it? No. You get on to them. You might not beat them to a pulp, and you shouldn't beat them to a pulp, but you get on to them. That's this word warning. You get on to them sternly, but lovingly. You get on to them firmly, but not hatefully. All right? This is a word that this is an action that we should do for each other as well. All right? When we see each other stumbling, when we see each other not doing what's right, we need to go to one another, admonish one another. That's part of singing too. Right. All right, now that we've looked at this word, what are y'all's thoughts on this word? I've got another verse that doesn't use the word, but let's open it up to conversation. What do you all think about this word warning? Do we do a good job about warning as the Lord's church in general? Not specifically about this congregation, but okay, while you're thinking about that, let me give you another verse. Jude 1 and verse 23. Jude doesn't use the word, but he gives a really good mental picture. Jude 1 and verse 23. "But others save with fear, pulling them out of the fire, hating even the garment defiled by the flesh." Right? If you see your brother, if you see your child, if you see a common Christian burning, what are you going to do? If their clothes are on fire, are you going to let them just burn? You better not. You ought to pull them out of the fire and push them to the ground and stop, drop, and roll, right? Get that fire out, even if it hurts them. You need to do whatever it takes to get them out of the fire. Now let's ask this question. What if they refuse to come out of the fire? What do you do then? Do you keep pulling them? Do you keep pulling them? Sometimes, this goes back to what Paul told Titus, sometimes some people are so stubborn that you just need to let them get burned a little before they'll pay attention. Right? That's why you reject a divisive man after one or two admonitions, is because sometimes rejection is what people need rather than warning, rather than this warm, firm warning from your fellow Christians. So, yeah, right, 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 right. Yeah. We could all probably picture people who love um, punishing people, calling people out. Maybe you had an employer like that who just loved throwing you under the bus at any point that he could, right? Um, that's not what we should be doing as a Christian. It should be a kind, should be a loving, it should be a tender-hearted action whenever we see somebody. Some people you can save by compassion, right? And you don't even have to really warn them. You just have to say, "Hey, this is not good," and they immediately stop, right? You don't even have to get firm. They immediately stop. Other people, though, they need that tough love, right? They need to have those stern conversations to pull them out of the flame. So, okay, talking about that. So Jude splits people into two different categories, right? Some save with compassion, some save with fear, hating even the garment defiled, right? Paul also, coming back to Colossians here, Paul splits preaching into two categories, and that would probably be a good. These two categories probably go along with each other. Jude's two categories and Paul's two categories. Some save with fear. That's who you warn. That's who you admonish. But others save with compassion. That's who you teach. There are some people that, rather than having a firm conversation and being told, you need to do this, other people need to just be sat down with and say, hey, I don't think you really understand what's going on. Let me guide you through it. Right? Okay, so here, let's give an example here. Someone summarize how Apollos became a Christian. Who was Apollos? Yeah, that's right. He was teaching John's baptism there in Ephesus, right? And this couple, Aquila and Priscilla, heard Apollos preaching, thought he was real sharp, but thought he was also lacking in some areas. And so they sat down with him. This is recorded at the end of Acts 18. They sat down with him and they, quote, taught him the ways of the Lord more perfectly, right? Apollos was one who just needed to be taught. He didn't have to be warned. He just didn't know better, right? Apollos was one who, if you sat down and you explained it to him in an unemotional way, in a very logical way, he would come away with it, and he would go, this is the truth, I'm going to do the truth, right? Some people just need to be taught, not necessarily warned, right? Some people are just like that. Well, as Christians, whenever we're presenting the gospel to people, so not just preachers, right, but in general, whenever we're presenting the gospel to people, we're going to find some people who need to be warned, who need to be persuaded. I use that word carefully. That's the word that Paul used in 2 Corinthians 5, knowing therefore the terror of the Lord we persuade men. Right? Some people need to be persuaded. Some people need to be shown in depth what hellfire is really going to be like. That's the terror of the Lord, right? But other people are they don't need that nearly as much. They just need to be shown what's right, and they'll do what's right, and they don't really care what's wrong because they've already decided I'm not going to do what's wrong. Doesn't matter what the consequences of what's wrong. I've already decided I'm going to do what's right. So, yeah, yeah, right. That's right. Yeah. And to contrast that, to find somebody on the other side, I suppose Paul would have been one who, although he was extremely intelligent, although he was extremely well educated, he was a little hard-headed, right? And he needed to experience some of that terror of the Lord. He needed the Lord to say to him specifically, directly, why are you kicking against the pricks, for him to realize that what he was doing was wrong, right? Paul was warned before he was taught. Isn't that interesting? So, different people need different things. As Christians, whenever we're looking for people, we need to use some wisdom. And if you don't have any, you need to pray for wisdom, right? James 1 and verse 5. We need a wisdom. We need some wisdom as we're talking to people, to know how to answer each one, to know how to determine what one needs and when he needs it. Right? Okay. Talking about teaching, when we go to teach somebody, whether it's in a public setting like this, ladies in your ladies class, or in a private setting, one-on-one or 2-on-2 or whatever the case may be, we need to, when we go to teach, we need to do two things. We need to be patient, and we need to be prepared. First of all, I want to look at patient, right? What may seem simple to us, because we've known it, because we've already learned it, may not be simple to them. Let me give you an illustration that when this became super clear to me. While I was still in North Carolina, we had this lady who contacted us. She had been receiving House to House Heart to Heart, and she contacted us, and for a month, I called her about every 2 or 3 days, and she just wanted to talk. Well, finally, she started coming to services, and then finally, she agreed to a Bible study. So this was a 3 or 4 month long process just to get her into the Bible study. And once I started studying the Bible with her, she couldn't read. This was a woman in her 70s who had never learned how to read. All right. When you sit down with somebody and they don't know how to read, you have to learn how to be extremely patient with that person. Right? Especially going through the Back to the Bible study. If you remember, we went through that last year. That whole thing is based off reading. Of course, Bible study in general is based off reading. Well, anyway, you need to be patient, and you need to be prepared, like I wasn't for the bell to ring tonight. So, all right, we'll pick up there-ish.